Hello, this is Austin Jones, and today I'll be speaking about communicating across cultures. Every culture has its own rules for communicating. These rules are typically subconscious and have developed over time within the culture. Unless we are consciously aware of these differences, we will not be able to communicate effectively with those from other cultures. Our nation is increasingly becoming global. Companies need employees who can communicate effectively with people from different cultures. Additionally, the workforce is becoming more diverse both ethnically and culturally. In this speech, I will discuss the different dimensions of communication across cultures. I will also discuss the sources of miscommunication and cross-cultural exchanges. And lastly, I will discuss tips for communicating with people among various cultures. When communicating across cultures, keep in mind that there are many dimensions of culture. In 2010, Carol Goman wrote an article titled Communicating Across Cultures for the American Management Association. He identified three dimensions of culture, which are high context versus low context, sequential versus synchronic, and effective versus neutral. Low context cultures communicate heavily through electronic messages, whereas high context cultures value face-to-face communications. Sequential cultures are guided by the time clock and calendar. Beginning and ending times are pre-planned and strict. Synchronic cultures view time as fluid, like a continuous cycle, with a relaxed view on beginning and ending times. Some cultures are more affective, which means that they show their emotions freely and openly. Neutral cultures keep their feelings to themselves and are very cautious and controlled. Now that I have discussed the cultural dimensions of communication, let me move on to my next point, which is sources of miscommunication and cross-cultural exchanges. In 2004, Larry Barra wrote an article entitled Stumbling Blocks in Intercultural Communication. He identified 6 sources of these. First was the assumption of similarities. Our tendency to think how we behave and act is a universally accepted rule of behavior. When someone differs in behavior, we have a negative view of them. Second, we have language barriers. Problems occur when there is an inability to understand what the other is saying because different languages are being spoken. Third, we have nonverbal misinterpretation. The way we express ourselves through body language, eye contact, gestures, and the way we dress can always be misinterpreted. Fourth, we have preconceptions and stereotypes, putting people into predefined categories depending on how we think they are or should be. This can interfere with being able to see things objectively. Fifth, we have the tendency to evaluate, the tendency to approve or disapprove actions based on our own beliefs instead of sincerely trying to comprehend the thoughts or feelings of someone else. Last, we have high anxiety. Anxiety can result when people are not sure how to act or behave when around someone from another culture. Now that I have discussed the sources of miscommunication and cross-cultural exchanges, I will move on to my final point, which is fundamental tips for communicating with people among various cultures. In 2019, David Grossman wrote an article entitled 11 Fundamental Tips for Communicating Across Cultures. The article discussed tips for communicating across cultures, but these are the ones that I thought were best. Do your research, do not make assumptions, slow down and speak carefully, do not use slang, listen and check for understanding, and be aware of differences in tone. In conclusion, unless we are aware of communication differences, we will not be able to communicate effectively with people from other cultures. It is helpful to be knowledgeable of the different dimensions of communication across cultures, the sources of miscommunication and cross-cultural exchanges, and be familiar with the tips communicating with people from various cultures. I believe this information will make a positive difference when communicating with people from diverse backgrounds.